Our stepson lived off us until I discovered secret meetups with his dad. We set consequences. He found a cleaning job at a bar and started proving himself. A story of boundaries and repair. I wake up and for a second, I don't recognize my own life. It feels like I'm a guest in a house that used to be mine. My name is Noah. I'm 35, and I've been with Maria for a few years. She has a son from a previous relationship, Miguel, who is 21 now. From day one, Miguel and I never fall into a father-son script. We never pretend that role belongs to me. Still, there used to be a casual respect between us. Lately that thread unravels. When Miguel is younger, he shows the kind of stupid lightness that makes you forgive a lot. He jokes. He tolerates my attempt to guide him. He leaves the house to go to school or hang out. Near the end of high school, something shifts. It isn't sudden. It creeps in like smoke, thin at first and then filling the room. He stops caring about finishing. He drifts through classes, shows up late, then stops showing up altogether. Graduation comes and feels less like a celebration and more like the end of an era I didn't realize I was mourning. I try to help. I pull up job postings on my phone. I show him freelance ideas tied to social media and content creation, things I think he could enjoy. Sometimes he listens for a while like he's indulging me. Other times he rolls his eyes and leaves the room. The money I give isn't charity in my head. It's investment toward independence, but he takes it like an entitlement. I start keeping track, not to punish him, but because the ledger of help becomes a ledger of worry. Phone bills, groceries, the occasional repair. The list grows, and I start to see a pattern forming between our patience and his inaction. There's a hardening inside me when I see him shrug off the basics of adulthood. It's not just laziness. It's the way he looks at me when I try to be direct, the coolness in his voice, the hint of contempt as if I am asking for too much. I catch myself asking whether there is something beneath the surface. Depression, bad company, substance use. I ask Maria if she's noticed changes. She shrugs, soft and patient, saying she believes in him and wants to give him time. That patience is one of the reasons I fell for her, but now it sits on the other side of our kitchen table like a fragile truce. He disappears for hours sometimes. The gaps in the day begin to read like entries in a log. Leaves at 9, back at 3, no calls, no messages. He comes home smelling like a bar, like cigarette smoke and cheap beer. At first, I tell myself these are normal 21-year-old things. But normal behavior doesn't come with the steady decline in effort. It doesn't come with excuses that start to sound rehearsed. After a while, curiosity turns into a quiet, practical decision. I start watching. I tell myself I'm gathering facts, not building an accusation. I ask neighbors if they see him out. I note the times he leaves. One night he goes out at 9 and returns at 3. He walks differently when he gets back, shoulders looser, a kind of ease he never shows around us. I don't say anything at first. I feel a protective heat in my chest that I call caution. A week later I follow him at a distance. I keep to shadows and light, staying just far enough that he doesn't notice me. He walks to a bar 2 neighborhoods over, a place with a battered neon sign and a sticky floor. I stand under a street lamp and watch through the window. He meets a man I don't know. He laughs differently, opens up, relaxes in a way he never does at our kitchen table. The scene settles into my head like a new piece of a puzzle. The pattern repeats. I sit in my car one night and wait. He slips into the same bar and slides into a booth. The man across from him looks older, heavier with life and choice, and when I realize who he is, my stomach drops. It's Mario, Miguel's father. No one told me Miguel had been meeting him. No one told me this had been happening in secret for years. Betrayal and relief arrive at once. Betrayal because a truth hid in the house with us. Relief because maybe now there is an explanation I can point to. I don't go in that night. I take photos from the car, my hands unsteady, like I'm collecting proof in a private court. The photos show them talking, passing a cigarette, laughing under neon lights. I stare at them until the images blur. I want Maria to know, but I want her to see the facts and not my suspicion, so I wait for another night. The next week I follow him again, closer this time. He ducks into the bar, sits in the same booth, and Mario slides into place opposite him as if this is their weekly habit. When Miguel gets up to leave, I walk toward the entrance with my phone in my hand. Inside, the bar smells like fried food and late hours. Mario looks different up close, rougher in the face and easier in his manner than the man who left a history with Maria. He seems like someone who learned how to survive his own choices. I introduce myself as Miguel's partner. For a moment, Mario gives the practiced nod of a man who knows how to play polite. Then the alcohol loosens him, and a certain contempt leaks out. He tells me, without shame, that he has been seeing Miguel for years. He says he told Miguel not to worry, that Noah and Maria will cover what needs covering. He shrugs and says Miguel has a right to enjoy life. His words hit like a knife because they carry permission fabricated into counsel. Don't work, don't worry. Let someone else do it. I try to keep it calm. I don't want a scene in a bar. Mario meets calm with a kind of sneer that makes the room small. He admits to telling Miguel that working and responsibility aren't strictly necessary when someone else is footing the bill. He frames it as freedom. I hear it as enabling that corrodes. I leave before the argument gets worse. I go home with pictures and a silence heavy enough to press through the house. When I show Maria the photos, she stares at them like someone trying to decide if the camera lies. For a long time, she says nothing. Her silence is a slow, stunned thing that sits between us. Later that day, she leaves the house and doesn't come back for hours. When she returns, her face is different, set, raw, edged. She goes straight to Miguel's room and opens the door like someone making space for a verdict. The fight that happens feels like something I've rehearsed in my worst thoughts. Maria names things that live in her memory like wounds. How Mario cheated and hit and betrayed. She reminds Miguel why he shouldn't glamorize the man who left them. Miguel answers with a strange loyalty that belongs to sons who idealize fathers. He says Mario understands him in a way Maria and I never could. He says I wouldn't get it. He says Mario is his blood, and that matters more than choices made by others. I pull Maria out of the room because I'm scared the argument will do irreversible damage. I tell her to breathe, to wait until morning to decide anything concrete. But when she turns back for one final word, she gives Miguel a single sentence that lands like a bell. Tomorrow you leave. The words hang in the air and make a kind of finality I haven't wanted but feel necessary. That night I don't sleep easily. I cycle through blame and doubt. Did I miss signs? Was I naive? Was my patience a form of weakness that allowed this to grow? I want to fix the situation without being the kind of person who covers for everything. I want boundaries that teach, not punish. I don't like ultimatums, but I also don't want to watch someone refuse to grow because it is easier to be provided for. I don't know what will happen when morning comes. Will Miguel leave and become angry at us forever? Will he hit a low that finally pushes him to change? Will he double down and cut ties? The not knowing feels heavier than any of the answers. I write this because an outside voice might see a perspective I can't. Tell me if I'm being too hard, or tell me if I'm not hard enough. For now, the house is quiet. Maria sleeps in the far room. Miguel's door is closed. I sit at the kitchen table with the photos open on my phone and the exhausted shape of someone who loves in different ways. I found photos of Miguel meeting his father, Mario, at a bar. I confronted Mario, who admitted he'd been telling Miguel not to worry about work because Noah and Maria would cover him. I showed the evidence to Maria. She stormed into Miguel's room, and they had a huge fight. Maria told Miguel he had to leave the next day. The morning after feels sharp and small. Miguel doesn't argue when he hauls his bag. He moves like someone practiced in leaving. Maria stands at the doorway with a suitcase half-packed. She looks hollow and determined at once. I want to stop him, to find words that won't sound like orders or threats. Instead, I say the only thing that feels true, that we love him, but we can't keep enabling him. He looks at me like I'm betraying him, like I have chosen the other side. He slams the door and walks out. For hours the house is too quiet. The clatter of cups in the sink sounds too loud. Maria sits with her hands in her lap and doesn't meet my eyes. I offer to call Miguel, to bring him back for a calm talk, but she shrugs and says it's his choice now. Watching her choose distance for strength is harder than watching her fight. It makes me realize the cost of being the reasonable one. They are the only person who sees you when you finally break. She goes about her day with a mechanical precision that makes time itself feel measured. Days stretch like thin paper. Miguel doesn't answer calls. He reads my messages and leaves the double blue ticks like a door slammed in my face. I check the places he used to hang out, the parks, the all-night pizza spot, the usual corner by the bus stop. Nothing. The silence grows and keeps me awake. Guilt arrives in waves. I wonder if I'd handled it wrong, whether I should have been softer, whether pushing him out made me the villain. On the fourth day, I decide to check the bar where I first saw him with Mario. My hope is selfish. I want to know he's okay. My fear is honest. I don't want to find him worse off. The bar's neon is still tired, and the owner nods when he sees me. The kind of nod that says he's learned how to shield his staff from nosy strangers. I don't expect to see Miguel as a bartender or a regular. What I find shocks me. Miguel is working alone, sleeves rolled, scrub brush in hand, bent over a sink in the back, cleaning the grease out of a tray. He looks up when I come in. The surprise on his face is a complicated map. Shame, anger, a spark of recognition like he can't decide whether to be proud or resentful. He asks, without a softening word, what I'm doing there. His voice is thin. There's gravel under his words. He smells like bleach and cheap beer and an alley I don't know. I sit at the scuffed bar top with my phone in my pocket. I watch him move, careful, efficient, small, no swagger, no defenses. He tells me, without dramatics, that after he left he found Mario. His father laughed at him, told him to find some game or hustle, and then left him on the curb with promises that evaporated. Miguel's voice is flat when he says Mario said he'd help, and then didn't. The cruelty of the abandonment is not theatrical. It's quiet and personal. He says he asked the bar owner for a chance, and the owner, annoyed but practical, gave him a broom and told him to show up. When Miguel admits he begged for the job, there's no melodrama, just a small, steady surrender to reality. He says he slept in a hostel the first night, then on a park bench the next, then realized he needed something to stop the panic where it started. An income, however modest. He didn't call Maria because he was ashamed. He didn't call me because pride hurt worse than hunger. The admission is small and huge all at once. I don't have a speech about responsibility that will land gently. Instead, I tell him plainly that I'm glad he found work, even if it's not glamorous. He looks at me like I'm an enemy offering a truce. He refuses the ride home at first, saying he can't go back to a house that told him to leave. His eyes flash with anger and also a tiredness I can't fix with promises. I ask him if he'll let me bring him a pair of clean clothes and some cash. He hesitates, then nods, like he's agreeing to something practical more than personal. We carry the things back in silence. On the walk, he tells me small things. How Mario laughed when he asked for help. How no one answered the first night he tried to call. How the bar owner gave him a broom and a word. It's less of a confession and more of the meager inventory of what happened to him. Listening isn't a lecture. It's a way to count the real damage and the small steps toward repair. Bringing Miguel home is awkward. Maria meets us in the hall with a guarded face that cracks when Miguel apologizes before he can stop himself. He says sorry to her like he means it, raw and uneven, with pauses that make the words land. She cries. It's abrupt and messy. She steps forward and holds him in a way I see heal before our eyes. The scene is not cinematic. It's clumsy and human. That evening we sit at the kitchen table, the three of us in a new formation that feels fragile and honest. Miguel explains the nights he was gone, the secrecy with Mario, and the eventual humiliation of being left. He doesn't excuse his earlier laziness. He just tries, haltingly, to explain the pull of having a safety net he didn't have to earn. Maria listens and then says what she needed to say in the heat of the fight, that she had been rebuilding from wounds Mario left and she couldn't let history repeat. She tells him that love is not an excuse to let yourself stop living. We talk logistics. We make a plan that isn't a lecture. Miguel will keep the bar hours until he finds something better. He will contribute what he can to the household. He will look into some training programs that don't feel like prison to him. Things that could turn his interest in social media into a real path without being a fantasy. He promises. in a way that sounds honest rather than performative. The promise is a start, not a guarantee. I tell him about the ledger of help, not as a threat, but as a record we can use to track fairness. I offer to help him with applications, with setting up a simple schedule, with practicing interviews. He bristles at the word schedule at first and then laughs a short, private laugh. The kind you hear when someone finds a small space of shared language. It's not a perfect reconciliation, but it feels like a seam being stitched. For days after, the rhythm changes. Miguel wakes early for shifts at the bar. He comes home smelling of bleach and fry oil and settles into asking what he can do. The mood at home eases into something that looks suspiciously like relief. Maria's guardedness softens with cautious smiles. She starts to make small jokes at dinner. I catch myself relaxing in ways I thought I deserved, but didn't. But relief is not forgetting. We keep our rules because love alone doesn't pay bills or teach habits. A week later, Miguel sits with me on the couch and says, quietly, that he hates cleaning bathrooms, but he hates feeling useless more. He tells me he found out that his father used his charm like a cloak to avoid responsibility, and that the realization made him feel foolish, but also free. That line of thought makes him steady. He says the humiliation pushed him to choose something different, and that choice, he says, is small but is. The house doesn't become perfect overnight. There are setbacks, missed hours, an angry text, an old friend who tries to pull him into old patterns. Sometimes I'm the one who loses patience and speaks too sternly. Sometimes Maria's wounds flare and she retreats for a day. But the dominant note becomes work and accountability instead of avoidance. Miguel apologizes again, this time with actions following his words. At night I lie awake and think about the line between pushing and supporting. I recognize that forcing someone out of the nest isn't always cruelty if the nest had become a place of stagnation. I also know that throwing someone into the street isn't a lesson in strength, it's abandonment. Finding the difference required grit, a few hard choices, and a quiet willingness to follow him to a bar and see the truth with my own eyes. Days pass like small, uneven breaths. After the fight in the broom, the house settles into a new rhythm that is quieter and more honest. Miguel wakes early for his bar shifts, and when he comes home, he no longer slams his bag down or avoids looking at us. Instead, he asks what we need done around the apartment, and sometimes he offers to cook. Simple things at first, like rice and eggs, but the gesture matters. Maria starts to relax in small measures. She leaves her guard open for a moment, and I watch the tension in her shoulders ease by inches. I try to be steady, less theatrical than the way my anger used to flare. Part of me wants to make grand symbolic gestures, letters, lists, ultimatums, that prove I was right all along. But what actually works is mundane. A calendar, a few job applications, a slow rebuild of trust. I sit with Miguel one night, and we go through his messages. He doesn't like the word application. It sounds like accusation. So we call it opportunities, and that soft language gets him to laugh once, a small exhale of relief. The bar owner gives him a new shift after seeing he shows up on time. With each week, Miguel picks up small responsibilities. He learns the beer line. He memorizes a playlist. He becomes the only one who can fix the back door when it sticks. The owner trusts him with small things, and that trust is the sort of currency we never had at home. Miguel starts to feel the worth of being reliable. One morning he tells me, almost as if he's surprised by the thought, that he wants to try a video editing course he found online. He says streamers and small creators talk about being authentic and building something, and he thinks he could learn to cut clips together. I remember how I first got into work, small experiments that made sense, and I feel the old stubborn hope that people sometimes redeem themselves with tiny, repeated acts. We talk about boundaries like they're instructions for shared apartment, rent, grocery lists, mornings. Instead of lecturing, I write a basic ledger and we agree on contributions. I tell him I don't expect his money to be the same as ours right away, just a mental step of paying his share of utilities. It's important to me that we don't infantilize accountability. He looks at the ledger and pokes fun at the numbers, but he writes his name in the column, and it feels like the first time he's claimed space as an adult under his own terms. Not everything is heroic. He messes up shifts sometimes. Once he shows up late because he got stuck helping a friend who flirted with the idea of escaping responsibilities. He comes home embarrassed and says he wants to be better. And this time the apology smacks of work that will have to be proven. Maria forgives him but asks him to accept consequences. He loses a weekend shift as punishment but gains the chance to make it up with extra hours. The discipline is fair, and he takes it like someone being offered the chance to build credibility. Mario is a ghost who creeps in and out through the edges. He calls twice in those first weeks. Cheap apologies that sound like offers rather than remorse. Miguel listens to the voicemails like one reads bad reviews, carefully and without trust. The second call is an old pattern. Mario asking to meet, promising things he doesn't mean. Miguel doesn't reply. The silence between father and son becomes a measured boundary that fits both of them by necessity. In time, Miguel tells us more about the early years he spent between us and Mario, the small silences that formed between fights, the way promises sound when they're given to keep a voice from rattling. I listen without trying to fix his memory. Sometimes you don't need solutions. You need a place where your story can be witnessed and seen as true. Saying sorry in the right way means making a clean slate of action. A month in, Miguel brings home the first small paycheck he earned for real work, hours that stacked up and finally produced a number on a slip. He hands it to Maria with a shy pride that makes my throat close. She counts it and then does something I didn't know she'd do. She takes some of it and puts it in a jar labeled Miguel's Fund. It's a practical kindness. She doesn't want him to blow it on an impulse, but wants him to feel the muscle of saving. Miguel laughs and says it's a bribe, but he tucks a bill into the jar with a grin like someone discovering that saving can be its own small victory. The real turning point is not any one apology or check, but the accumulation of mornings, where he shows up regardless of mood, the way he arrives with soap on his hands, and the willingness to listen. He takes a community class on basic editing and learns to splice footage. He stays up late practicing and shows us little clips he made. Mundane things like a montage of the bar's pastries or a slow cut of the street at dawn. He notices viewers react to sincerity rather than fabrication, and this gives him a small, steady confidence. We still argue. Old wounds flare when a text arrives from someone who tried to reintroduce a teenage swagger into his life. Sometimes he relapses into old genial cynicism, the kind that laughs away responsibility. Once he leaves the house without telling us, and we worry for hours. We call him until the battery on his phone dies. He returns with a bruise on his arm and a story that collapses into shame. We don't ask for his explanations. We offer stabilization, bandage, food, a chance to sleep. He sleeps. The next morning he apologizes and signs up for an extra shift to make up for the lost hours. Maria finds a small note under the cereal box one morning. It's from Miguel. I cleaned the sink. I paid for some milk. Love, M. It is almost ridiculously small. She cries in the kitchen not because the gesture is grand, but because the smallness is honest. We begin to trade these small markers of progress. Lists checked, texts answered, money saved. They are proof that change doesn't have to be loud. I also work on my part. I had to learn how to be firm without being cruel, because authority without empathy becomes punishment. I practice asking questions like, what do you need to do today that would make you proud? Instead of, why haven't you done X? The tone matters because shame shuts people down. I choose curiosity instead of accusation more often, and it opens doors I didn't know how to open before. Several months later, Miguel receives a message from the bar owner. They're short-staffed and want him to train someone new. It is a small promotion, but it says that his reliability matters beyond our walls. He accepts and puts up a small sign beside the register that says, "Training in progress." He leans into the role and discovers that teaching someone else helps him internalize good habits. One evening, after a long shift, Miguel sits at the kitchen table and opens up like a book that no one had asked to read. He says he still carries a complicated love for Mario. How could he not? Because abandonment doesn't erase need. He speaks about wanting to forgive but not forget, to reconstruct a sense of self that isn't just reaction to others. He says he wants to be someone who doesn't leave the people who love him. We make a plan with 3 small milestones: consistent attendance for 2 months, a basic savings goal, and a short online course completed. For each milestone, he earned small privileges, like control over the weekend playlist at home or a budget for one personal purchase. The plan isn't punitive, it's a scaffold. The hard truth, though, is that not all pain disappears with effort. There are nights when Maria wakes up and squeezes my hand because the memory of what Mario did still wakes her. There are days when Miguel's guilt spirals into apologies that feel like self-punishment. Healing is messy and not linear, but it is real. I document it not to claim victory, but to keep an honest ledger of time and work. Months become half a year. Miguel's social media channel grows slowly but steadily. He edits short clips about small human stories from the bar, an old couple who met there, a regular who brings a different hat every Thursday. People respond to the authenticity. He starts to make a little money from a few sponsored clips. Nothing life-changing, but it changes the conversation at our table. Instead of us asking why he doesn't work, he tells us about a pitch that could get him a small grant. The table conversation shifts from accusation to opportunity. Then, one quiet afternoon, Mario appears at our door. He looks older in a way that's different from what time does. Disappointment sits in his face like an old coat. Miguel answers and stands there with something I don't expect, an unannounced calm. Mario asks if he can come in. I step into the hall and feel every bruise of the past tighten. We agree to a conversation with boundaries, short, supervised, honest. Mario starts with a rehearsed remorse, like a man trying on a suit he doesn't know fits. Miguel listens. Then, in a voice that's steady and new, Miguel tells Mario what his absence cost. A life of busking for survival, nights sleeping on benches, the bitter taste of false promises. Mario's face shifts from guilt to defensiveness and back again. He offers excuses that sound thin in the light of what Miguel has built since then. I won't lie. Part of me wants to throw the door open and demand ultimatums, to recite every little ledger line. But Miguel keeps a hand on my arm, and I respect the space he's chosen. He tells Mario that he doesn't need permission to move on, and that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing not to be defined by what was missing. Mario listens, perhaps for the first time, hearing the consequence of his choices. After that, Mario fades. Maybe he goes back to habits that keep him distant. Maybe he means to change. The truth is outside our control. What we can control is how we respond. Miguel continues to work, continues to build a life that doesn't depend on a father's approval. He talks about moving out into his own place soon, not as a dramatic exit, but as a natural step in adult life. On the day he moves, we load boxes into a small truck. Miguel leans against the doorframe and looks at us with gratitude and fatigue. He says he's nervous but ready, and his voice trembles in the way people do when they're telling you the truth. We hug, awkward and sincere. Later, as the sun lowers, Maria and I sit in the kitchen with the apartment quieter than it has been since we met. We talk about mistakes we made and things we'd do differently. I tell her that I'm proud of how she set boundaries without hatred and proud of how she softened when he showed the will to change. She rests her head on my shoulder, and I feel the slow, patient stitch of life moving forward. When I think back to those first nights of suspicion and the car idling outside a bar, I realize how fragile and necessary confrontation can be. It can break a person if wielded poorly, or it can be the moment that clears the air for honesty. For us, it was the harrowing beginning of a long apprenticeship in love, not the romantic kind, but the practical day-to-day labor of holding people to truth. Now, months later, trust is not a given but is being redistributed in small, repeatable acts. Miguel pays his share. He calls if he's late. He completes his course and shows us his certificate. He moves into a small studio nearby and invites us to dinner. The dynamic isn't perfect. We still have bad days. But most mornings he wakes up and shows up, and that simple choice has changed everything. I don't know if the future will be tidy. I know only that the choices we made, some necessary toughness, some steady support, and the willingness to follow a person into a bar and see what they were doing, made the difference. I write this not to claim a moral victory, but because someone else might be standing at a kitchen table with photos in their hand and uncertainty in their chest. My advice is clumsy and honest. Hold the line, offer a hand, expect consistency, and let consequences teach instead of punish. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and comment. Thanks for your attention.